All right, we are ready whenever you are.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start then.
Oh, hold on, we need an interpreter.
Yeah. You click More in the toolbar.
Yes, click more on the bottom of the screen and then you should be able to click interpretation.
I don't have
I still don't see you.
I don't have interpretation as an option on the More button.
When I click the American Sign Language, I see her in a separate screen. So I think we're good.
Okay.
Where is it? Where do you click onto it?
For me, it came up on the left hand of my screen.
Did you click on something though?
I did under More, and I clicked on interpretation, and then I clicked on American Sign Language. And
Yes. It's on the bottom of your screen, it should say more, and then you click interpretation, and then something pops up on the lower right. It says sign language off in American Sign Language.
correct.
And if you click on American Sign Language, you can see her.
I don't have the interpretation as an option.
I think we have to
I can
keep it
see her
moving.
on my
Yeah, she's
screen with the
on.
recording.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and
Okay.
begin. Good evening and welcome. I'm Jim Dubinsky, a colleague of Khadijah's, a retired Army officer and co-founder of Virginia Tech's Veterans in Society Initiative. On behalf of the initiative, I want to thank my Virginia Tech colleagues, Dr. Jason Higgins from VT Library Publishing, Dr. Debbie Bradbard from the Boeing Center for Veteran Transition and Military Families in Northern Virginia, and Dr. Anne Marie Halterman, an Air Force veteran and friend from our partner organization, Uniting Us, which supports veteran wellness and transition. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation. Tonight's event, Veteran Experiences, Workplace Culture and Historical Truth, an Essential Conversation, is profoundly relevant in the current political and social moment. When so many voices compete for attention, when narratives about military service, workplace identity, and historical memory can be fragmented or contested, we need spaces like this one. Spaces where we can listen deeply, think critically, and engage with the complexities of lived experience. Tonight, three authors explore questions that sit at the intersection of service, identity, and truth-telling. What does it mean to carry the weight of a veteran experience into civilian life? How do we navigate authenticity in professional spaces that demand both our labor and our conformity? How do we bear witness to historical trauma in ways that honor those who've lived it while building understanding for those who haven't? These aren't abstract questions. They're in a pause before a veteran decides whether to mention their service in an interview. They're in a choice between speaking an uncomfortable truth or maintaining professional polish. They're in every classroom where we teach history that someone in the room has lived. These questions are deeply personal, profoundly political, and urgently relevant, not just for veterans and military families, but for anyone grappling with questions of belonging, identity, and institutional power. We're fortunate tonight to have three exceptional authors whose work illuminates these questions from different but complementary angles. Khadijah Queen's Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, a veteran's memoir, offers an unflinching look at military service and its aftermath, written with the precision and power I associate with poetry. An award-winning author of 6 books in poetry and a book of criticism, which I love, Khadijah is a Kawe Kanem Fellow, one of the nation's most distinguished fellowships for African-American poets. She holds a PhD in English and Literary Arts from the University of Denver. Many of you know her as a colleague at Virginia Tech, where she teaches creative writing, literature, and poetics. Tonight, we get to hear her as a veteran, a memoirist, and truth teller. Khadijah will introduce the other two authors, Jodi-Ann Burey and Susan Southard. But before I turn the microphone over to her, I want to offer just a brief reflection on how these three perspectives might work together. What makes this conversation so valuable is precisely how these works don't fit neatly into categories. Instead, they overflow boundaries, challenge us to think across disciplines, across contexts, across the artificial separations we sometimes impose on human experience. When veterans transition to civilian workplaces, they carry not just skills and training, but entire worlds of experience, realities that can't often be translated, identities that resist being packaged into professional narratives. These truths challenge the very notion of, quote, bringing your full self to work. When we ask people to be authentic in professional settings, we rarely reckon with the cost of that demand, especially for those whose whole selves might threaten discomfort or certainly not fit in the institutional mold. And undergirding all of this is the question about how we tell true stories about war, about service, about institutional power, about survival. How do we create narratives that honor complexity without flattening it? How do we bear witness without exploiting? How do we build understanding without demanding that those who've experienced trauma become educators for those who haven't? These are the questions we'll be exploring together for the next hour and a half. I encourage you to use the chat throughout our conversation, not just to ask questions, but to share resonances, make connections, and challenge ideas. This conversation doesn't belong to the panelists alone. It belongs to all of us in this room. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, and we want to hear from you. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that sometimes conversations about military service, workplace discrimination, and historical trauma can surface difficult emotions and memories. Please take care of yourself throughout the evening. We have an American Sign Language translator interpreter with us, and we're committed to making this space as accessible and inclusive as possible. So let's begin this essential conversation, and I'm honored to turn things over to my friend and colleague, Khadijah. Thank you for being here.
Jim, thank you so much for that gorgeous introduction. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you, Jason, as well, for making the time to organize this event with me and with Susan Southard, our moderator, and Jodi-Ann Burey. Welcome. I'll give my visual description for blind and low vision folks. I am a brown-skinned Black woman with salt and pepper hair, wearing reddish, burgundy-ish lipstick and a beige sweater and white headphones with a microphone and sitting on a yellow couch. Thank you also to Pro Bono ASL for providing American Sign Language access. Our interpreters are Christina Monson and David Banda. This event has been made possible partly by generous funding from United States artists as part of the Disability Futures Fellowship that I received in 2022. I want to thank them, especially Sammy Hopkins and Ezra Venus, for their guidance and assistance. I wanted to bring us together in conversation. I think Jim covered it, so I don't want to talk too long, but I think it's important to say that it's part of this Veterans in Society initiative because veterans are not siloed in the world. We are part of the world, and I thought it would be really instructive to pair these books and see these parallels between veterans' experiences and workplace experiences in terms of inclusivity. And thank you to Susan, who's our moderator. I'll introduce her, and then she will introduce Jodi-Ann and kick off the conversation. Susan's first book, Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War, which came out from Viking in 2015, received the Dayton Literary Peace Prize in Nonfiction and the J. Anthony Lucas Book Prize, sponsored by the Columbia University School of Journalism and Harvard University's Nieman Foundation for Journalism. It was also named a Best Book of the Year by The Washington Post, The Economist, Kirkus Reviews, and the American Library Association. Susan presents keynote addresses and lectures at international disarmament conferences, universities, and public forums across the U.S. and abroad. She was the founder and artistic director of the Phoenix-based Essential Theater, a professional company which served marginalized communities across the Southwest for 32 seasons. I'll turn it over to my friend of 20 years, Susan Southard.
Thank you so much, Khadijah. And hello, everybody, and welcome. We are so glad that you're here with us today. My job today is moderating the conversation between Khadijah and Jodi-Ann and to moderate your questions toward the end of our time together today. So Jim introduced Khadijah. I'm just going to say a couple of other things that are really cool about her bio. She has so much one could say, as does Jodi-Ann, but I'll just be brief. And that is that one of her other, so this is her book, her most recent book that we're bringing into the conversation today, Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. Brava, Khadijah. And one of her other books of 8 that she has written is called I'm So Fine, A List of Famous Men and What I Had On. And this book was praised in O Magazine, The New Yorker, Rain Taxi, and elsewhere as, quote, quietly devastating and, quote, a portrait of defiance that turns the male gaze inside out. In 2025, the Foundation for Contemporary Arts recognized her work with the Cy Twombly, am I saying that right? Award in Poetry. Born in Michigan and raised in Los Angeles, Khadijah holds a PhD in English from the University of Denver and is an associate professor of creative writing at Virginia Tech. Jodi-Ann's bio, it could be very long, but she requested a very short bio. It says, Jodi-Ann Burey is a writer and critic who works at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. She is the author of Authentic, here we go, The Myth of Bringing Your Full Self to Work. And, you know, sometimes short is stronger. Thank you so much, Jodi-Ann. It's powerful, those sentences. Welcome to you both. And I'd like to start with asking you both to give us a really short overview. That's hard to say because they're such deep and rich and amazing books. But just a short overview of what your book is. And then if you would read a short excerpt. And I think let's start with Khadijah. Would you do that?
Oh, we did it in reverse. Okay, my book
Okay.
is is about my
Right.
time in the service. Yeah, it's about my time in the Navy in the 90s. I was a sonar technician in the Navy right after they started letting women in. So 3 years, 2 years, 2 years after they started letting women become sonar technician on board destroyers. I was on a small boy, that's what they call destroyers. 330 people. There were 30 women out of that 300. I was one of them. So that is that experience is what it's about on the surface. It's also about like self-empowerment and trying to figure out how to navigate the difficulty of that kind of a challenging environment. So I'll read a little bit from a chapter called Sucks to Be You. And it's on the ship and me trying to like deal with the difficult workload, let's say. Sucks to be you. I wrote poetry on the ship in the rhyming forms I knew from school. Sonnets, heroic couplets, a villanelle. I waited until I felt something I could express in complete sentences, in full stanzas, a moment turning toward its capture. A poem would contain in language what I struggled to control in life, what I could not let loose in the day-to-day routine of enlistment. Rigorous, annoying, and definitely not as exciting as I'd expected. I greased torpedo tubes and stood at attention or parade rest for morning meetings and swabbed the deck and read sonar manuals, all the while imagining myself at the end of my enlistment. Full-time student again, carrying book stacks across campus, writing papers in my head and on notebooks before typing them up in the library. Maybe I could apply to UCLA or USC when I got out. Or I could switch to officer training and do 20, retire while still young and be a non-traditional student, buy myself a little house in Ladera Heights and fill built-in shelves with books, lace every empty wall space with colorful art from Leimert Park. I'd steal a moment to write future me into existence or to write my way through my feelings after another tedious day. After I wrote a poem, I could sleep. After I wrote a poem, I could wash in the tiled community closet of a shower and ease my discomfort about the lack of privacy. I could get dressed in the dark morning, go back on watch, go back up the ladder well, and endure jokes and comments I found repellent. After I wrote a poem, I could write letters to my family and tell them not to worry. I was fine. What I couldn't write my way into was belonging. I loved the prospect of being a sailor. I was young, fit, smart. I matched them in uniform and training and duty, but I felt painfully out of place. And sometimes I failed. Newly promoted and newly in charge of at-sea extra duty assignments on the ship. A second-class sonarman in my division named Duff switched me from quarterdeck watch with the 9mm to line detail. While I held the sidearm just fine, my little hands were too small to grip the heavy lines tying the ship. This is why I'm a tech, not a damn boatswain's mate, I told him, endangering the crew with the threat of snapback. He sent me below decks to roll the line back up on a giant wheel instead, a task not unlike spinning thread back onto its spool, except you had to do it fast and it burned your palms raw. My palms turned into mitts of hard flesh by the end of the day, and all softness peeled away. When Duff saw me picking at the blisters, he smirked. "Sucks to be you, Queen," he said, whistling as he tried to breeze past me. But Duff was heavyset and 6'5", so tall he had to duck to walk through the portholes, and he bumped his head on the overhead pipes for the umpteenth time. I laughed to myself. Did I even want to belong with these ignorant ass dudes? I'll stop there.
Thank you, Khadijah, so much. It's beautiful to hear your voice after reading the book in my own head. I love it. And now it's my great honor to introduce Jodi-Ann Burey. Jodi-Ann, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you could give us a brief sense of what your book is, and it's so layered that I can't even imagine how you do that. And and then if you could read a short excerpt from your book, please.
Yes. First of all, thank you all for having me here. I really, really appreciate being with you all. I met Khadijah earlier this year after I read this gorgeous memoir. My book hadn't been out at the time, and I just felt there was so much kinship between our work. And so this event to me is the manifestation of all the feelings that I was feeling when I was reading Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. So I'm deeply, deeply honored to be in conversation today. So Authentic, the myth of bringing your full self to work, it is very layered, but at its core, it's a critical examination of workplace culture, that in my argument is trading on marginalized identities only when it is convenient and profitable. And I make the argument that being authentic is such a nebulous idea. And so this book kind of goes through different lenses to view authenticity with hopes that we can define authenticity for ourselves and how we navigate institutions, and to separate the self, how we define ourselves and how institutions define people who hold any type of marginalized identity. And so I will read from two separate sections of this chapter that is titled The Spectacle of Representation. Um, this is within the larger section examining authenticity as a spectacle. And this particular section kind of uses my relationship to Serena Williams, who, everyone agrees is the greatest athlete of a generation, if not of all time. And what does it mean to have this powerful Black woman also be susceptible to the same types of violence and harms that a lot of Black women face in the workplace? And then by extension, how does my relationship with Serena, my projection of myself onto her, kind of block my own criticisms of the ways that her body and her voice are used? So I'll read just from two different sections of this one chapter. I learned to play tennis the summer Venus and Serena Williams competed against each other in the 2001 US Open Finals. I was 15 years old. Although I knew little about the Williams sisters, like many Black girls, I marveled over their white beaded braids draped atop their heads like jeweled crowns. My eyes filled with awe as the sisters soared beneath their weight. Did their mother, as mine did, fasten the tips with tiny rubber bands and tinfoil? I had no interest in tennis, but this year was different. New York City buzzed in anticipation of the sister-sister match, the first primetime women's singles final in tennis history. My sisters and I romped about the house breaking things all summer. We could not lose no matter who won. As an answer to my mother's prayers, my older sister enrolled us in a community tennis program at a local high school. The 8-mile distance between my neighborhood court and Off Ash Stadium collapsed. My imagination swelled in the summer heat. I grunted like Serena, screamed like Serena. I jumped and twirled at each victorious stroke. I willed my body to fly, net to baseline. My coach taught me how to play. Serena Williams taught me how to be. Bold and unbothered, unbounded and unstoppable, precise and unapologetic. I lobbed my voice and my dreams to the clouds. I watched Serena Williams and witnessed a whole person, joyous and frustrated, playful and focused, incomparable, uncompromising ambition. She secured her legacy as the greatest of all time. This is representation. She won. We won. Despite her greatness, often because of it, media scorned Serena for her body, her clothing, her hair, her voice, her power. That scorn mirrored institutional desire and distaste for my body, my clothing, my hair, my voice, and my power. If it can happen to Serena Williams, it can happen to me. If doctors could ignore Serena Williams, nearly costing her her life during childbirth, why wouldn't it take 3 years to find a tumor growing inside my spinal cord? If audiences could boo Serena Williams for winning, why wouldn't my colleagues nitpick my work? The precarity of Black excellence. This too is representation. In my early 20s, I spent my slim savings on private lessons at the Roosevelt Island Racquet Club near Manhattan's Upper East Side. My hospital window faced its long, domed roof, a small cruelty. I spent hours serving angry, longing looks across the East River. Memories of my coach's drill commands faded beneath my physical therapist's gentle, remedial instructions. Grip both banisters, shift your weight to the left, lift your right heel, pull your body forward, push up on your toes. It took me 3 days to learn to climb one flight of stairs. I used to play tennis down there, I told my nurse as she helped me back in bed. 2 months later, I returned to work. 2 months after that, Serena returned to play in the 2018 US Open Finals, her first since the birth of her daughter. If Serena could come back, so could I. I grabbed my cane and headed down to the gym to watch on the treadmill-powered TV. My feet began to numb 20 minutes into the match. Serena's coach made a hand gesture from his seat. The chair umpire issued a coaching violation, a warning. She walked up to the stand. I don't cheat to win. I'd rather lose. Opinionated. I gripped the handles to offset my weight. Serena threw her racket to the ground and it folded like a napkin. Aggressive. The chair umpire issued a racket abuse violation, point penalty. An ESPN commentator noted that such a penalty was rare in a Grand Slam final. Serena confronted the chair umpire again. I've never cheated in my life. I have a daughter, and I stand by what's right for her, and I have never cheated. You owe me an apology. Her voice cracked. My knees buckled. Serena sat in her sideline chair between sets. She confronted the umpire again, called him a thief. Difficult. The umpire issued Serena a verbal abuse violation, game penalty. My heart pounded. I felt exhausted everywhere. Serena appealed to the referee. This is not right. This is not fair. This has happened too many times. There's a lot of men out here that have said a lot of things, but because they're men, that doesn't happen to them. Because I'm a woman, you're going to take this away from me? That's not right. She lowered her eyes and pursed her lips. I lowered the treadmill speed to a crawl and straddled the belt. She lost. We lost. Tears rolled down her face and mine. A spectacle of pain. As a child, I played in Serena's power, hoping one day to wield its full force. Not until adulthood did I understand why Black women needed so much. I've watched online video clips of this match many times over the years. The last time I typed Serena, US Open 2018 in the search bar, YouTube listed these auto-generated search options. Serena, US Open 2018 meltdown. Serena Williams, US Open 2018 outburst. Serena Williams, US Open 2018 drama. I felt exhausted all over again, suffocating in the little room Black women have to be sad. I chose meltdown because that's what happens when delicate treasures burn. I'll read just a few more paragraphs that happen later in this chapter. What happened in between these two is Serena Williams narrated a Nike commercial called Dream Crazier. And it's this kind of you go girl ethos of the tagline is like, if they want to call you crazy, then show them what crazy can do. And the commercial was about supporting women and girls in sports. So in response, a middle distance Olympian, Alicia Montano, she promoted her own kind of parody of that commercial, entitled her campaign Dream Eternity. She had a mini documentary and an op-ed with the New York Times. And she kind of called out Nike for saying that you're out here promoting women and girls in sports. But from her own experience and from other athletes' experiences, if you're pregnant and postpartum, then Nike and the Olympic committee, they take away your health insurance and they don't pay you. And so it's this kind of tension between feeling so seen by Serena Williams and feeling so emotional about that commercial. And I still feel emotional about that commercial, and this sense of wanting to delight in the experience of being seen. And in order to do that, then you don't want to look further into kind of criticizing these institutions and these messages. And so towards the end, I'm kind of picking up and kind of digging a little bit more into the spectacle of representation and how that can harm us. The spectacle of representation allows institutions to make the image of progress itself. In doing so, they distort our gaze and evade demands for systemic change. Institutions across sectors capitalize on the language of social justice to build their coffers. Nike promotes gender equity values in their ads, yet undermines those very values in their policies. Industry leaders like Nike possess economic, political, and cultural capital to do better, but won't. They praise Serena's return to tennis after giving birth to her first daughter and do not examine structural policies needed to protect birthing parents. They showcase diversity and inclusion, but ignore reparative measures that would make diversity and inclusion unremarkable. They hire professionals of color for leadership positions and ignore practices that prevent more from joining the ranks. They stand ready for political winds to shift, folding DEI policies with ease. The U.S. Supreme Court's landmark decision in Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization overturned federal protections for legal access to safe abortion care. 13 states enacted so-called trigger laws that banned abortions immediately or soon after the Supreme Court ruling. By November 6, 2024, the New York Times updated their report listing 21 states that banned or restricted abortion earlier than the Roe v. Wade standard. Large corporations such as Bank of America, Uber, Deloitte, Salesforce, Zillow, and Disney issued public statements that pledged to cover travel expenses for employees who need abortion care out of state. Media praised these corporations for stepping up where legislators failed. But let's think through this logically. Exactly who am I telling about my abortion needs? Human resources? My manager? Is this information protected as abortion care becomes ever more politicized and legislatively unsafe? Is there an annual abortion allocation? Like, just how many abortions is too many? Birthing parents fear severe consequences to their livelihoods if they need to reveal a pregnancy too early, or if they land an interview while they're showing, or if their pregnancies are closely spaced. Parents, especially women, can be reticent to tell colleagues they have young children. With each new corporate pledge, I wondered whether these institutions actually expected workers to disclose their need for abortion care. I doubt it. Lack of substance is the nature of spectacle.
Okay, we can just end there and breathe. Oh, thank you so much. It's really breathtaking and breath robbing. Not your beautiful writing, but the realities that you're writing about. Thank you. So, as Jim said earlier when he made that beautiful introduction, there's so many overlaps between these two books, even though their focus and content and experience are very different. And they have to do with systemic hostility and the violence of racism, misogyny, ableism, lies, hypocrisies perpetrated on Black women in the workplace, and the impact of these brutalities on people across our nation, including the two of you. And just as a side note, since I'm a white woman moderating this event with two African American female authors, I also have a severe disability of long-term complex PTSD from being in an authoritarian violent cult for 14 years. And still, I emerged out of that, and it's been a terrible ride. It's been a wonderful ride too, to heal, but it's been very, very, very difficult. But still, I am a white woman. I was raised in privilege, and I was raised educated. So I entered these two worlds that Khadijah and Jodi-Ann write about so beautifully, and learned so much that I didn't know. And I'm really, really grateful to you both. And I look forward to this conversation. So I'm going to start off with some questions, and I hope this will be a discussion. And toward the end, we're going to have, a conversation as opposed to just a straightforward kind of Q&A. And toward the end, we'll have time for questions from those of you who are here. I can't think. Those of you who are here with us. And for anybody who would like to, if you would so kindly put your questions in the chat, then I will keep track of them and bring them to the fore when the time is right. So to both of you, and we can, I'll just let you all decide who starts. How about that? I would like to ask, what was the impetus for you to write your books? And what truths did you want your readers to hear and walk away with? This may be obvious from your readings, but still it'd be nice to hear from you on this. And actually, instead of having you decide, why don't we start with Jodi-Ann and then we'll go to Khadijah. That's all
Man,
right.
I thought Khadijah was gonna go first. Okay. Um,
Okay, let's do it that
no, no,
way.
no.
Give you
I'm
a bit of a
ready.
rest. You
I'm
have
ready. I'm ready.
off.
I'm ready. I can be ready. I'll keep it brief, since I just read. But so as I said a little bit in my reading in 2018, I was diagnosed with a spinal cord tumor, and in order to address that, the surgery had to cut into my spinal cord and remove the tumor. I didn't go through radiation or chemotherapy. The tumor was able to be fully resected through the surgery, but the process of that surgery partially paralyzed me, and the result of that was a spinal cord injury. And so when I was going through that experience and being treated in a cancer center, as you can imagine, you're kind of faced with a lot of platitudes and cliches. You're a warrior, just take it one day at a time. And I just really struggled with this idea that I should adopt these narratives in some type of way. Because when you're dealing with chronic pain, when you have lost your ability to walk and use your hands, this one day at a time, a day is an incredibly long unit of measure. And so you think it's short, and it is agonizingly long for me. And so in my recovery process, and then when I returned to work, I just became very sensitive to these kind of outside narratives that I was expected to just take on without question when they did not mirror my experience at all. And so a lot of my work over the past years has been this unraveling of those narratives. And so for folks who are familiar with my work, I co-authored an essay called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And this book has a similar structural argument of what is this narrative of come just as you are and be authentic, and what are the ways that just doesn't mirror my reality at all. And so the greatest impetus for me in writing this book was to have a conversation about workplace authenticity that I recognize. And also, I have a master's degree in public health. And so a lot of my work is through that lens. I very much see authentic as a public health intervention of the ways that we can define ourselves for ourselves and have that inform the way that we show up in institutions, have this kind of ideological break between the self as we define it and the institution as they define it cyclically, and value it cyclically. And hopefully that could help folks kind of navigate the occupational violence that we experience every day in our bodies.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for that. Susan, did you want to say something before I talk? Okay, okay. Um, I did not want to write this book. So I got the kind of opposite experience. I went to MFA school wanting to write about my family. So I've told this story a couple of times before, but my mother's side of the family came north to Michigan from Alabama and Georgia, respectively. Um, my grandmother in particular is from a town called Abbeville, Georgia, which is between Selma and Montgomery. And they went north about 100 years ago because her father was lynched and their store and land were taken and they were threatened. And so it was either leave or die. So I wanted to write about that. And I was telling my mentor, the late Valerie Boyd, who, if you don't know her work, you should. She wrote the definitive biography of the writer Zora Neale Hurston. Um, but she was listening to me talk about that, and then she was like, "Weren't you just in the Navy?" Because I was just a couple years out. And I said, "Nobody wants to hear about that because nobody really did. People were they're like, "Oh, how was the army?" And it was just like a surface level question. They didn't actually want to know how it was. So I came up with a surface level answer. I was like, it was an experience. That was what I would tell people. And if they didn't want to know any further, then that's as far as it went. Um, but she said, I want to read that. So I wrote 80 pages that semester, and that became the basis for, like the nugget of the book very, very soon after I got out. So it's very fresh, very clear, even though when I left, I kind of left my um, not so fabulous ex and left all my stuff behind. So I didn't have my diaries or anything. I had to just do it from memory. Um, so that's how the book came to be. And it was very sad and very angry and highly depressing. Um, so I put it down for a long time. There was only one or two essays, and I think Susan, you read those when we were in workshop, that were funny, like pranks on the ship and stuff. So those made it out. But I had to figure out over the years how I wanted to present this story, and did I want it to just be this unrelenting, trauma parade, and I didn't want that. And I came up with the idea to research women at sea so that first I wouldn't be by myself, and so that people could understand that women have always been at sea, right? When you think of a sailor, you think of a guy in a little sailor hat or whatever. You don't think of the women who have been at sea, but like women have been pirates, they've been captains and leaders of fleets, they've been merchants, and they've been sailors, and some of them have dressed as men, and served during wars. So we've always been there. And I wanted to make sure that that came through. That's one of the truths I wanted to come through. The other is that the way that I saw women being treated and the way that I was treated was the opposite of what the narrative had been. Like as Jodi-Ann has been saying, like these platitudes of inclusion are very surface and they don't really do much unless you change the culture and the cultural practices and the actual beliefs of people. So we could be in sexual harassment training in the service, and the men would be just cracking jokes and being vulgar and not taking it seriously at all. So it doesn't matter if the words are there, if the behavior doesn't change. And now we don't even have the words anymore. That's going away. So mm, I think one of the truths we need to reckon with is that people have always resisted this kind of ignorance and fought against it and existed in spite of it, always. And it's time to sort of let that narrative fall away that, oh, that's how it used to be, and we need to go back to how it used to be. It's never been like this. People have always fought, people have always spoken up. So it's BS. And it would be nice if, the world could listen to women more often because we know the truth and we're telling it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and thank you for telling the truth, both of you. I'm wondering if you could give a few examples, or even just one, if one stands out for you, of how some of the institutional policies that demonstrated ignorance and bias against women and or women of color um, affected your physical and mental health. It's sort of a big question because I've read both your books and it's really been very impactful on you, or it was. And so I apologize for such a broad question, but if you could try to narrow in on one or two that you feel, called to talk about right now, that would be wonderful. And gosh, Khadijah, you just spoke. Are you okay to go there, or
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
want?
I have an example. I'll talk a little bit about the cripple unit in the book. So I got injured in boot camp, and I got injured partially because I was mistreated. And like even the shoes that we had in boot camp were not women's shoes. They were made for men and they weren't half sizes. I was a narrow foot and a small foot. So I'm like in the wrong shoes the whole time and marching and running in the wrong shoes. And so I developed a stress fracture in my shin that I ignored for long enough that they said if you had kept running on it, your bone would have snapped. And so I got sent to the cripple unit, which is where they put broken sailors. That's how they described it. And in that unit, the recruit convalescent unit is the formal name. I met so many women who had gone through so much stuff. There was a 21-year-old who had cancer in there. There were women who had been harmed by their shipmates. There were women like me who had been, overdoing it, or made to overdo it by hostile supervisors or, their recruit division commanders. And so, the morale was very low. And I ended up, after a few weeks, becoming the recruit, the chief of the cripple unit, the chief recruit that they called the RPOC, recruit chief officer or whatever. So as the RPOC, I made like a flag with cross crutches for us and like prescription pills and like, ice packs and stuff like that so that we could have some sort of sense of ourselves as worthy and as capable of either getting out of this thing or doing what we needed to do outside of it. But to your question, I think it can feel very insurmountable, those obstacles. You could live in the hurt and the pain of it. You could be defeated by it. And I don't know, I've always rejected that notion. And I had hoped that I could offer something imaginative to people to recognize that we don't have to accept the narratives that are imposed upon us, even when we're being harmed, even when we're hurt, even when we're down. Like, we don't need to be ashamed of that. That shame doesn't belong to me. Like, it belongs to you, the person who's harming me. And that goes for sexual assault, that goes for the ignorance around pregnancy and things like that.
Ah, thank you for your strength. And I hope everybody will read Khadijah's book because there are a zillion amazing stories in it. Thank you. How about you, Jodi-Ann?
Yeah, I think I remember reading that section in Khadijah's book, and I was just emotionally and physically like just reacted to it of like I could see Khadijah just like doing another run and that kind of injury keep exacerbating itself. And I really appreciated that. And I think that was probably one of many times where I felt a kinship with our work. What I think is interesting in your story and what connects to some of the policies that I outlined in the book is when you talk about hostile supervisors. And oftentimes it's the people themselves that are hostile, even if there is a policy in place that would make it easy for you to get accommodations or to get support, that the actual human beings that you're dealing with makes that process more challenging. What I outline in the book is a term called hostile accommodations, which was coined by an equity consultant activist here in Seattle, Christiana Obey Sumner. And they define hostile accommodations as a manifestation of bias toward the person requesting an accommodation or working to self-accommodate who is met with physical, social, and or political barriers during the process. And so what I appreciate so much about hostile accommodations is that in the workplace, we're often, well, I learned the language of reasonable accommodations that under the ADA, that if you need anything to help you do your job in any type of way, you should be able to get access to that. And depending on your organization, how you're able to have your access needs met through a reasonable accommodations process can be incredibly challenging. And I list a bunch of those stories in the book. And so what I found in my research is that Often hostile accommodations don't cost anything, or they don't cost much. And so if I need flex time or I need to work from home, that doesn't cost you anything and you cannot run out of it. So there's this psychology of we have to limit access to accommodations because people will game the system, or we can't afford it, or et cetera, et cetera. And it's just not true. One of the very small accommodations, quote unquote accommodations, would be like needing a standing desk, right? And so the same way that you bought that desk, you can also buy an adjustable standing desk or create some kind of systems for people who need that. And so I think a hostile accommodations is a more accurate way of describing the accommodations request process that, of course, disproportionately impacts women, people of color, folks with any type of additional marginality, in addition to whatever they need their accommodations request for, a disability, for example, because there's so much of that process that depends on someone believing you, affirming that you actually do need this thing. And even something that seems a bit neutral and innocuous as, well, we need a medical letter, we need a doctor's note for you to get this accommodation. Well, we already know that people of color, women, trans folks, fat folks, there's a lot of medical trauma and a lot of bias within the healthcare system that can make it really challenging to get a doctor's note, which again, you don't really need, because the thing that I'm asking you for often doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you a lot. And it requires non-medical people to start getting in your business. I think a non-disability, quote unquote, accommodations that we can think of is like bereavement leave policies. And so there are some organizations that will give you certain amount of days depending on your relationship to that person. So they require you to disclose who the person was who died. And like, well, if it's a parent, you get 4 days. But if it's your best friend's mom, then you get a day. And it's just like, why are we doing this? So I think the way that has impacted me and my career, especially when you are disabled, in an acute way, like maybe you don't expect it. And I became disabled in adulthood, is you're going through your own journey of disability identity. Not all disabled people describe themselves as disabled or identify with disability as being an identity, or they don't identify their disability or their characteristic as a disability. There's a someone I interviewed in the book who's deaf and for a while did not consider deafness as a disability because at that time he didn't have like a sensibility of culture or deafness as an identity, not just like the matter of fact of, how he engages in the world. And so in the beginning, as I was coming into my own, because you're interfacing with the institution, their doubts on you can create doubts in yourself of, wait, do I actually need this thing? Do I deserve this thing? Do I belong to this disability community? Because even with our kind of like handicap placard and our icon for it, it's someone in a wheelchair. And so you don't think about, it's difficult, or there's a process of thinking of yourself as disabled if you are not in a wheelchair. And so as we're thinking about, am I worthy? Am I capable? I think communities is what helped me kind of assert that for myself to allow me to push back a bit against institutions that doubted whether I needed an accommodation. And I think specifically when you have an additional identity that's marginalized, so if you're a Black woman and disabled, then they perceive you as lying about a disability, one, because of those identities, and then layered on that is that if your disability has an intermittent need. And so I was okay today and yesterday and the day before that, but now I have a pain flare and I'm not okay. And so it can seem like you're being deceptive or you're lying or, somehow you're lazy and trying to get out of something when we're just human beings that have bodies that, work in unpredictable and often inconvenient ways, inconvenient to capitalism for sure.
It's just, it's, I don't, I'm going to ask this question. It's not on the, on our prep, but before I do, I just wanted to remind those who are listening that if you would like to ask a question for Jodi-Ann or Khadijah or both of them, please put it in the chat. And if no questions come up, which is fine as well, we'll continue this conversation through the time that we're scheduled to be together. And I mean, my question, I don't even know if it's a good one or not, but how did you survive your rage? I mean, it's just like I can hardly survive it now. And frankly, I have had that all this time too with my own experience. But I want to hear about post. I mean, Jodi-Ann, you still go through it, and Khadijah, you're in the you're out of the Navy, but I don't know what else you go through. Some you can speak of, some you can't. But how do you not deal with, how do you survive your rage? It seems like it could just consume one into non-existence because it's so intense.
Yeah, I can. I've definitely suffered the consequences. Um, Not all of which I feel comfortable talking about here because it's my workplace. But, a lot of therapy. So shout out to my many therapists, my several therapists, and shout out to CBT. And I actually in 2016 went through something very, very intense when I was doing my PhD. I just started my PhD and it was like right after I had dealt with this Me Too situation in the poetry field. And it was extremely traumatic and very public and not something I wanted to do, but selected me basically, and nobody else would do it. And so I couldn't stand for this predator who was my ex to continue to be lauded while he was, assaulting young people, in particular students. And so I just was like, he gotta go. And I had help for it, but it was very, very traumatic. And so I actually did EMDR therapy for that, and that was helpful. And I was able to process some of the anger from the military as well. But that surprised me. I had gone through that already, and it surprised me again as I was revising the memoir how angry I was that they were in the way of these opportunities that I wanted for myself, that they could easily get, that they were supported in getting. And instead, I just kept coming up against all these brick walls that were harming me physically. Like there's one episode in the memoir with this guy in my division who wouldn't help me move a toolbox. And this work that we had done in the torpedo locker, we had organized it very wonderfully, me and one of my colleagues, right before an exercise. And he was able to distract my colleague to go to his station. And he said, "Oh, I'll help her." And he didn't help me. And so I hurt my back and the locker was messed up. So it's a thing that I know is harmful to my body. And so I have to process it mentally and physically in a very, very intentional way. And writing does help with that. Writing helps with it. Yoga, meditation, therapy, good food, good people. So a lot of things. I need a lot of things to help me process.
Before we go to Jodi-Ann, I just want to clarify for anybody who's here with us who may not know what CBT or EMDR are. Do you want me to say it or you want to, Jodi-Ann? I mean, Khadijah. Um, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and EMDR is eye movement desensitization R. I forget what the R is. Do you?
I don't remember. It's like
Anyway,
a physical way of processing trauma.
yeah, it allows your body to process
Yeah.
trauma in a different way than just through talking in a therapeutic environment. Thank you for that, Khadijah and Jodi-Ann.
Yeah. I do those things too, but I think there's no disrespect to any of those things because I do all of them too. But I think the thing that helped me the most was there's a scene in the Avengers where everyone's trying to figure out like how the Hulk kind of keeps it together or kind of what, helps him transition back and forth. And he's kind of walking and they're like, come on, we need the Hulk, we need the Hulk. And they're like, he said, you know what my secret is? I'm always angry. He's like, I don't get angry. I'm always angry or something like that. And so for me, I'm like, yo, me and my rage, we just hang out. We're always hanging out, skipping down the street together. We write letters to each other. Like we talk to each other. And like, I'm not afraid of the rage. And I think what helped me in a more serious note, even though I'm very serious about the Avengers and that scene, but Audre Lorde's uses of anger and just relying on Black feminist scholarship to really show that like anger is normal and it's actually the most rational response that you can have when it comes to this type of kind of acute and ancestral discrimination and abuse and bullying that we face. Like if I was not rageful, I would be incredibly concerned for my mental health. And so I just, you stay angry so you don't have to get angry. And I think writing helps with that. But I would also want to highlight like something like a cripple unit, right? There is something to be angry with other people. What can happen often as a disabled person within the workplace, it's just sometimes it can just be you, or you think it's just you, and that kind of isolation can exacerbate and make that rage a little bit more difficult to handle. And so being in community with other people who are also angry is probably some of the most loving and fun and meaningful spaces that I've been in. So I would just say, don't be afraid of your rage. My rage, we hang out. We're going to dinner tonight. I'm gonna tell you that.
Wow, that's fabulous. Thank you so much. Wow. Oh, hold on. Let me just see what's in here. That's Khadijah. Thank you for that. Well, you all talked about just mentioned how the process of claiming, I don't know if you were really talking about claiming your disability identity through writing or whether it's claiming your outrage through writing as well. But can you tell us how writing has been a part of your ability to know yourself and know yourself within the communities that you live in, whatever that may mean for you.
Yeah, I can start.
Uh,
So when I was in the hospital, I couldn't use my hands. I couldn't write at all. Like I couldn't hold a writing tool, and I would write using speech to text in my phone. And so writing was the way that I could just out loud talk to myself and kind of process everything that was happening. But then also rereading my own work, there's a little distance. I'm someone who likes to get high off their own supply. So when I reread my own work, I'm like, "Ugh, that was so good," It just allows me to think of myself as an artist alongside the ways that I'm trying to define my disability identity. And to me, that feels very Frida Kahlo-esque. Frida is kind of all over everything that I have. I have a photo of Frida Kahlo that stays in the road copy of my book, and looking to her in the way that she lived her life, where her politics and her identity and the reality of her disability existed alongside of her art. They were inextricably linked. And so once I was in the hospital, I felt like I was kind of tapping into that energy. And so writing helped me understand and helped me learn how to claim a disabled identity. Interestingly, writing also reminds me of my disability in ways that can be distressing. Writing longhand is just very physically exhausting because, I still just have a lot of neuropathy issues. And so as much as I want to write, the fact that I can't write for long periods of time reminds me of the disability, which makes me want to write more. And it's just like a very vicious process of like trying to manage pain. But I think, as they say, any good writer reads. And in order for me to write this book or write anything around my own identity or as a disabled person and think about disability, I had to read so many books by disabled and disability scholars and crypt theorists. And so I can just share a few of those books. Black Disability Politics by Dr. Sammy Schalk, Crypt Genealogies, which is an incredible, incredible text. It is an academic text, but it was co-edited by Mel Chen and a few other people. Crypt Negativity, something that shows up in my book, that was written by crypt theorist J. Logan Smiljules. And Care Work by Leah Lakshmi Pietna Samaransinha is a really great one. Blackness and Disability by Christopher Bell. And of course, Disability Visibility, which was edited by Alice Wong, who recently passed. And so I still keep going back to this cripple unit from Khadijah's book, but I think it's important to surround yourself by disability and CRIP scholars because the experience of disability is not just an individual illness or condition. It is scholarship, it is knowledge, and learning directly from disabled people is how I was able to write myself through that identity.
Yeah, I agree. Community is so important, and I did not have any language for it when I was writing about it. Like I think in Fearful Beloved, one of my poetry books, I talk about having fibromyalgia, which is chronic pain and fatigue illness that's very mysterious, mostly affects women. They don't know what causes it. They don't know. We know it's trauma. Consistently. But me talking about that led some folks from the disability community to reach out to me. And I'm so, so grateful for that embracing because it led me down that path of reading and learning about scholarship and understanding how to speak articulately about that experience, including Alice Wong, who asked me to write an essay for disability intimacy. She has something called Disability Visibility Project. And also the cyborg Jillian Visa, who just basically like I'm scooping you up. And I love her. Speaking of rage, her rants it's uncomfortable for people who are non-disabled, but she really is able to articulate just how absurd and enraging and horrible and stupid it is to treat people differently and exclude them because, exclude us because our bodies work differently, especially when, if you're lucky, you might live long enough to become disabled yourself. So the delusion of ableism is that it won't be you, when in fact it will be if you're lucky. And we need to understand how expansive humanity is physically, emotionally, and all that. Um, in 2021, right after I came here to Virginia Tech, this is during the pandemic and everything, and it was just such a big life change. And then my mother was sick and had some other stuff going on and all my support systems were collapsing. I was not coping well. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I literally can't function. And it turns out I have ADHD. And while going through menopause, while during the pandemic, while transitioning to a new job, it was just too much and I literally could not function. So I had to find a way to write it out. And we do need our models for that. I watched a lot of YouTube videos too and TikTok, social media. Um, but it was the same community that had embraced me before that really just helped me to come to grips with the fact that being disabled is a state of being that society has a really hard time understanding and resists greatly. And at the same time, we are capable of being so creative. There's a book called The Minor Gesture by Erin Manning, who's autistic, and she talks very brilliantly about creating spaces, designing spaces specifically for people who are neurodivergent and like intentionally, and how it actually does not cost that much if you design it ahead of time. Like, so can we just fast forward out of the stupid? I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that word. Fast forward out of the ignorance, the determined ignorance that excludes certain people because we only want this little tiny group to have everything. That don't make no sense. It doesn't make any sense. Why are we participating in this? I don't get it. So I write my way through it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Jodi-Ann, I see that you responded to Ace's question, so maybe we don't, is there any reason to say more about that before we, because I was going to, Jim asked a question that's a little longer, so I thought we'd ask Ace's first, but if you feel like you've addressed it well enough, I'll go on to Jim's. You let me know.
Yeah, I've addressed it. It's just a question about where does hostile accommodations come from. It's not something that this participant, it was Googleable, and it's based on Christiana Obey Sumner's work, and I included a link to that essay, and so I reference it and expand more on it in my book.
Great, thank you. Jason, I see your note, and I think Jodi-Ann just reiterated what the question was there, and I'm going to read the question from Jim. So thank you so much for that, Jason. So this is a bit of a long question with a bit of an introductory expression here. This is from Jim Dubinsky at Virginia Tech. In many ways, this conversation, is a response to this question, but I'm going to ask it directly. Your titles suggest the contemporary discourse around identity, whether in workplace culture or veterans transitions, operates through what we might call rhetorical entrapment. The myth of authenticity promises liberation through self-disclosure, while the actual constraints facing veterans and other workers create impossible binaries where neither choice offers safe passage. I noticed that Khadijah suggested making friends with your rage. Is that part of a strategy or a suggestion about how to develop alternative rhetorical frameworks that neither demand the constant performance of a full self nor force people into compartmentalized, inauthentic, professional personas? That's a lot of a question, but which of you would like to start with
I
that?
mean, I was just going off of what Jodi-Ann was saying about hanging out with her age. I was just agreeing.
We do hang out. I'm going to steal this. I don't know who created it, but I'm going to steal this idea of rhetorical entrapment. Um, that is it's such a good term because I think in a lot of ways we are, but it's not to minimize it. We do live in America, right? We're a nation of symbols. And often our symbolism and the narratives that we have about ourselves do not match reality. And so, I know we're in a veterans space. And so I hope that it's not too flippant to say that, there's this kind of image of America of USA number one. We're the best in the world. But the reality is that on a lot of indicators that really matter in terms of equity and support gender equity and all of these, like, especially social indicators, education, attainment, the ways that we're able to keep our people safe and healthy and eating good food. Like, we're very, very low on that. I think the only thing we're USA number one on is mass incarceration. And so we're a nation of symbols, and I think it's very important for our own survival and our own sense of self and personhood is to figure out where are we rhetorically trapped, because that can change how we think of ourselves, and it can influence our values and the work that we do and the energy that we put towards, understanding ourselves and being in community with other people. And so I think once you're able to really kind of get your way out of that. The way that I've done that is by reading other people. And I think looking for the voices of folks that historically have been told to just stay in the house, shut up, or don't exist. And so I think that you do yourself a disservice if you do not read disabled people of color, right? If you don't read at folks who are living at those intersections, because we have probably the most clear look at how our institutions are actually functioning. So I think even small things, back to Audre Lorde, like using your anger, and for me, like, yeah, making friends with my rage. I think there are ways that we can reclaim kind of how we see ourselves, which for me connects to the root word of authentic, which is authentis, which means to act on one's own authority. And so there are a lot of ways that the institution can have us. Audre Lorde said that if you allow other people to define you, they will always define you to your own detriment. And so, can we figure out ways to define ourselves for ourselves, which really only happens in community with other people? And I think we start kind of separating ourselves from like hegemonic ideologies from the institution.
Sorry, I kept accidentally pressing the button because I was writing stuff down and it's like on top of my laptop. But here's why Jodi-Ann's book is so important because she's got the data. She's got the data to back up everything that she's saying. And the entrapment is these symbols that she's talking about, right? But if we have the actual facts, then we understand what the actual truth is. There was one study that I was just reading the other day, I can't remember where, but it was talking about the causes of death in the US. And suicide and terrorism and murder is all the way on the bottom. But what do we see on the news, right? What's number one? Heart disease. What causes heart disease? Stress for trying to deal with this BS, right? Number two was cancer. And so it's, we've got to get the actual facts and not allow these weird people to legislate us into silence. Not the bad weird. We want the good weird only. And so we've got to be willing to disobey in practice, even if we can't disobey out loud in language, because it's not a safe space to do so. So we've got to be able to learn how to disobey in practice. Use your public library. If you can't afford to go buy books, go to the library. Use those free resources while we have them and get the information you need to survive this because the attack of it is real and it's been ongoing. Ask Black people for 400 years, ask Indigenous people for 500 years in this place. And before that, elsewhere. One of the things I did during the pandemic was study ancient history to figure out why people weren't responding with care during the pandemic when we were seeing people die. Like, what makes somebody on Fox News say, "Oh, I've lived long enough, we should just let old people die"? What kind of person says that? What makes someone reduce their level of empathy to wish death on people who are valuable? Our elders are valuable. So I really had to understand what that is. And it's a very ancient thing. People are people. They're the same over time. So, which I've already said earlier on the other side. So just as there has been ignorance the whole time, there have been people who've resisted that and been disobedient. So be disobedient, however you can be.
Okay, shall we breathe with that? Just be disobedient when you can, how you can. I'm really filled in ways that I I couldn't have imagined even after reading your books from this discussion today. Excuse me. So we have just a few more minutes. So how have you learned to feel safe? Or where have you learned to feel safe in your lives? And we have about 6 or 7 minutes for this, if that's enough. I don't want to cut you off, but just to make sure that we stay within our time for the audience.
Yeah, I'll be very
Jodi-Ann?
short. Can I be very short? I have always been saying like that I'm free within myself. I used to put it in my bio when I was on Facebook, free within myself. I've had to find a home within because physically there have been so many episodes where I have not felt safe. And the pandemic was a different kind of lack of safety for somebody who's already got disabilities and doesn't want to be further compromised by a disease that all the studies have been saying since December of 2020 is an HIV-like illness that infects the lining of your blood vessels, and you have 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. So it could do whatever it wants in your body once it gets there that's vulnerable and attack it. And I'm convinced that it is the reason why my dad died early, why it killed my aunt, it killed one of my older sisters. And so it's a very serious thing to be in society that doesn't value your presence enough to take safety precautions, who doesn't even care about their own safety, who's got this layer of delusion around public health, that's dangerous. And so I've had to turn inward and to my imagination, my creativity, how I take care of myself, how I take care of my family in order to feel safe. And it's been a lot of work to regulate those emotions.
Thank you. Thank you. Jodi-Ann, do you have any thoughts on that?
I love Khadijah's answer. It was a mic drop for real, because even as I was thinking about it, then you were using the words that I was thinking of for my own answer. And so, I love this idea of creating a home within yourself. Has also been true for me. I think also I feel most safe like at home, right? And I say that as someone who I was laid off early 2020, and then I worked for myself ever since. And, potentially might need to go back into traditional work soon. And so now I have 6 years under my belt of practicing care and safety and acceptance and love and grace, like for myself. I think it's very difficult when you are raised in America and have this kind of insatiable capitalistic drive for productivity, and your productivity is how other people measure your worth and value, that it can be very difficult to even say to yourself, I need to take a break. I need to lay down. Maybe I need to take a nap. Why don't we nap as a culture? So I think being at home for these 6 years, I've learned ways that I can work that don't hurt me. Even as I'm sitting with you right now, the fact, and I talk about this in the book, where my disability is visible to me, but invisible to you. The fact that I'm not wearing sleeves is a part of my disability because I don't have things touching my body that aggravates my neuropathy triggers. I have very soft fabrics, and at my feet is a heating pad because even though my home is warm, my feet have a lot of thermal dysregulation. So the lower half of my body thinks that I'm like in the Arctic tundra right now when I'm not. And so I'm able to like keep my feet nice and cozy. I can be in this pleasant conversation with you all with minimal pain because I've learned how to take care of myself. And when I was in the workplace and I was learning to do these things, I had to be faced with so much hostility of like, why do you have a heating pad everywhere? And like, oh, if you're so cold, or if you're so cold, why don't you have a sweater on? So why do you need to sit like so just I learned to be very clear about what I needed for myself. So when I go out and when I communicate with other people, I can be clear and unapologetically so. And so what that has also helped develop is what I think it was Mia Mingus who made the term. She's a disability scholar who and crip theorist who coined the term access intimacy. And so this sense that I know these things for myself, but I need to be community with other people who know these things about me. And so we can create some sense of intimacy with each other. So even if that other person doesn't have my lived experience, they can help anticipate and support me with me having my access needs met. And that practice of access intimacy and be on the receiving end of that intimacy allows me to do that for other people. And so I don't need to have someone's direct experience at all to be able to try to build some like supportive ways, like ways that I can support them both interpersonally, but also institutionally. And so, what I thought was even so beautiful about when we started this conversation is the amount of time that it took to make sure that the interpreter could be viewed. And so I don't know if other people in the audience experienced that or if they were like, ugh, can we get this started or whatever it is. But we have to crib time, which is another like terminology of it's okay to take a few minutes to make sure that folks in the room and folks who are watching this recording can access the conversation. And how wonderful it is that all of these people collaborated on that. And so I think modeling that, even if that's something that I was not directly impacted by, made me feel like, wow, this is a safe space. That even outside of my home, through virtually, that this is a safe space to have this conversation about disability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. There are only a few minutes left, and there's one question that Jim plugged in, and I don't know if it can be answered quickly or not, but I'm going to ask it, and if you can find a way to bring it to a few words, great. And if you can't, then we'll have to only do what's possible for today. His question is, how do you see excuse me, how do you see the genres you chose functioning differently from journalism, oral history, or policy papers in shaping public policy?
My short answer is I think genres are a industry term. Even though I identify myself firmly as a nonfiction writer, I'm also a baby writer. Like this is my first book, but I pull so much from different types of work. And, you know, we have had policy shaped by pop culture before. And so I don't remember the name of the case. I think this was went up to the Supreme Court, but it was a Black woman, I believe, but a Black person with natural hairstyles with braids who was unlawfully terminated because of the braids. So it went up the court system, and they were arguing that the hairstyle should be protected because it is an extension or an expression of a racial and cultural identity. And that justice used some movie or TV show with Bo Derek, a white woman who was kind of running on the beach and had, her blonde braids, and used pop culture as a way to say, well, braids are not cultural. So no, you don't get protected in this way. And so I think, if we're talking about influencing policy, that can come from wherever. Um, that's my short answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
my short answer is going to be about poetry, like me being a poet, and I want to acknowledge Jim's other question that's in here because he talks about Muriel Rukeyser, who I did my dissertation on, actually. So he says, as I've been listening, I want to say that what we've experienced tonight echoes something Muriel Rukeyser said. One works on oneself, one writes the poem, makes the movie, paints, and one is changed in the process. The work is what we wanted, and the process. And she's very much that kind of writer, was very influential for me early on because she writes in every genre, and she's not afraid to be experimental about it. She was heavily edited and silenced as a woman, as a single parent, as a queer, disabled woman in the 30s, and 40s and 50s, et cetera. And she was such an activist and advocate, even though sometimes she's a little problematic, but she was so fierce and willing to risk it. And I just really appreciate her way of being in the world. So if you don't know Muriel Rukeyser, she is who I think it was Adrienne Rich said she's the mother of us all, or Sharon Olds, one of them, the mother of us all, this generation of women poets who became fierce and unsilenced. Um, and so I think what I want to say about it is that poetry is like the oldest news, right? So, and what's that Williams quote? Men die every day from the lack of what is found there. Poetry is not the news, right? So poetry, when I teach it, I often teach it with this chapter from um, oh, I'm at the end, but like poetry accesses all the parts of your brain, emotional, instinctual, and intellectual. So we've got to find a way to get back to that information if we're going to change anything on this planet.
Thank you. I regret having to say goodbye. However, it is time. And on behalf of myself and everyone here, first I'd like to thank Jodi-Ann and Khadijah. I'd like to thank Jim and Jason. Jason has been handling the technical end of things. And I'd very much like to thank Christina and is it David? Our two sign language interpreters for your beautiful work tonight. Thank you so much. And to the audience who has joined us and who will continue to join us on YouTube, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for your compassion and your presence in the world. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Jim and Jason. Thank you, Jodi-Ann. Thank you, everybody who's joined us. Thank you to Christina and David and Pro Bono ASL. Really appreciate y'all.
Be well, everybody.
I think went well.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm
See if I
excited
can.
about being able to